Are you thinking about buying a condo anywhere? It could be in the United States, but especially if you're looking to make a move into the Portland area and you're thinking a condo might be a good idea. Well, in today's video, we're going to be really real with you guys, and we're going to tell you it is one of the worst investments you could possibly make, and we're going to talk about it right now.
All right, if this is your first time to the channel and you want to know everything there is to know about living in the greater Portland metro area, then make sure that you click that subscribe button and tap that notification bell so you can be the first to know when we release new videos.
I'm Ann Stewart and this is Erica Hagfors, and we are your go-to gals if you're considering making a move and buying or selling in the Portland metro area. We help people every week. We love getting the reach out. So just know that if you want to get a hold of us, all of our contact information is in the description below. Text, call, email. We'll hop on a Zoom with you. We'll give you all the deets, and we'd love to help you make that smooth move here to the Portland metro area. So we want to get really candid today about why we say don't buy a condo, especially with the things that we're going to talk about today. We're seeing a lot of stuff on the horizon. We're dealing with a lot of stuff, both locally and nationally, that people should be aware of. And, you know, there was a time, Erica, right, when it was not a bad time to buy a condo.
No, there was definitely a day and a time where condos were a great option. You know, it was a good entry-level spot to land if you were looking to get into real estate and couldn't afford a detached home. However, the landscape is changing fast, and it is definitely not a good investment. In fact, I think Ann and I would say it's probably the worst investment you could make in the Portland market right now. And, you know, some of the reasons that we'll start with reason number one, and that's really just it's a buyer's market right now.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you think about choice and how picky people can be, I mean, there's a lot that you have to work against with a condo.
Yeah, so the condo market right now here in the Portland metro area is a buyer's market in most cases. Obviously, there are those, you know,
there's unique
circumstances where that's not the case. But especially in kind of the downtown area, there's no secret downtown Portland, especially since COVID, has had some real challenges. And there's just a lot of inventory, and there's a lot of inventory sitting and a lot of inventory having price reductions. In fact, the latest Altos reports, which we'll put here, shows that we are definitely in a buyer's market in the condo market in downtown Portland. And even surrounding the Portland area, we're seeing some trends that are happening. Now, there are reasons for that. Now, there's always been risks associated with being in a condo that always have existed. But now more than ever, there's some things you need to be aware of if you're considering, you know, buying into it. And if that's been on your radar, then you need to be aware of the risks before you do it. So yeah, being a buyer's market, maybe you could pick up a really good deal right now. You would just have to hold on to it for a long time, but there are risks.
Big time.
All right, so the obvious risk is an HOA. Now, a lot of people want to buy a condo because of the ease, right? You're paying in every single month in monthly dues known as HOA dues, or quarterly, or however it's broken up to. That HOA is supposed to manage your maintenance on the exterior and common areas and all of that. But the problems exist with HOAs because, first of all, HOA dues are known to go up sometimes yearly.
They're like taxes.
They're like property
always
taxes.
Gonna just go up. They never go down. And like you said, it's things, they do need to increase. We don't like it, but they do actually need to increase, because what happens when they don't is assessments happen. And we'll get to those in just a minute. But you have to account for how you're going to pay for all of that maintenance. You know, like Ann said, it's all the exterior maintenance. It's all the common areas. It's all the systems. You know, do you have elevators? Do you have pools? Do you have, you know, like lounge areas? Those are all covered by the HOA. And so if the cost to maintain those and have landscaping done is going up, then guess what? Your HOA dues are going up, and you don't necessarily get a say. I mean, if this is a larger building, you don't get a say in that, really. I mean, I'm sure that there's a board. However, you know, your voice could be minuscule compared to some of the others. And in some of these smaller units, maybe you do have a little bit more say and that's impactful, but then there's other issues regarding that as well.
Well, and you're subject to the group as a whole, not just yourself. Like, you might say, hey, I don't need or want this to be repaired or replaced or dealt with right now. But as a group, you have to make a group decision. So you have to be okay with that logic, that you are in a collective, not just an individual. That's why we recommend single family homes over it, because let's say your roof is getting to the end of its life. Now it may have some years left in it, whatnot. You can decide when you want to replace it, or if maybe you want to just patch it up or whatever. But in an HOA, you are probably going to be doing it because everybody needs it done, not just you. And so, by the way, you want the HOAs to go up at a systematic way, because if they don't go up, which we see people run into this all the time, where the HOAs just don't go up because they don't know whether they need to go up over time. And then the HOA gets kind of in a place where they don't have enough in reserves, and then they're charging it back to the owners, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But the point is that you want an HOA that is naturally increasing based on what is projected to be needed to be dealt with. Or maybe there's an issue now that they say, hey, we need to do that. Now, one thing to look for if you're going to buy a condo is a reserve study.
And that is, I was just going to say, that is a contingency that's built into the Oregon sales agreement. Is that you have a period of time to review and get all the documents pertaining to the HOA, and the reserve studies are one of them.
Well, and let's talk about what a reserve study is. A reserve study is where the HOA actually pays to have a third-party company go and assess the actual complex of the condo and decide, oh, in 5 years from now, this is going to need to be replaced. In 10 years from now, this. And then that, based on that reserve study, they give a really educated guess on how much that condo is going to need to increase their HOA dues every single year in order to buffer and have enough funds to replace or repair things at different times. And they buffer in inflation. So if an HOA is doing that, that's super smart. That's a good signal that that HOA is being fiscally responsible. And so if you are going to buy into an HOA, I would absolutely recommend that you only look at condos that do those, because that will usually keep preventative measures in place so that the cost of things don't just get hit with assessments, which we're going to talk about next.
So assessments are kind of this little, it's the result of if the HOA has not managed their money well, or done a reserve study and been steadily increasing their HOA dues. So let's say a big project needs to be done, roof, and they don't have enough in that budget to actually pay for it. That difference then gets split between the condo or unit owners. So sometimes it has to do with like how much square footage you have, and sometimes it's just equally divided, amongst the participants in that unit. But they can be substantial depending on the issues that are happening, how big the complex is. We've seen assessments up into the $100,000 range, a lot of in the $50,000, $60,000 range, and then sometimes they're low, but you just don't know. And the other thing is you do want them maintaining these buildings, so something to think about again, if you're going to, go against our sage wisdom here and buy a condo, how old is the building? How much maintenance is having to be done to keep that thing just at like the status quo? Because the older buildings do have issues. And then if it's a newer building, what materials did they use when they built the property? Did they go with the latest greatest that hasn't been tested? Or did they use solid materials that you understand and have a history of being good, solid citizens over the time?
Well, and the other thing too is sometimes, even though newer seems better because everything's brand new, oftentimes if there is an issue with any of the materials used in building over the course of the first 5 to 8 years, they go back and sue the builder or developer for that issue because they don't have the money yet to repair or replace it, and they look at it as installation defect, and they go back to the builder or developer. Now, in those cases, you still may have an assessment, because oftentimes the HOA is saying, we need money for the legal fees, we need to, pay to cover this stuff now, and then later get some settlement money. So sometimes it just becomes a thing.
Well, and this is kind of the next, issue with the HOA situation and condos in general, is just litigation. With these newer, even up to 5-10 years old, we find that some of these buildings can have litigation with their builder. And, the builders never want to admit fault. And it can become a battle that goes on for several years. It's very expensive. And, then at the end of it, you still are potentially left with having to cover lawyers' bills as well as the repairs to the property. Or what can also happen is that maybe the builder kicks in money, but it's not enough to actually fully correct. Right. And then you're left with that bill.
And sometimes it's not just a big lump sum of an assessment. We do see a lot of that. Oftentimes people can't pay these big lump sums. And so they spread it out. They usually take a loan out from a bank for the difference to fix everything. And then they charge back a monthly additional HOA to cover that cost. So you might have your normal HOA that you're used to paying every month, and then they'll charge another few $100s a month because they have to pay back that loan where they got all the repairs done. So again, we see this all the time. I mean, Eric and I are always looking for that whenever we see condos or anybody's asking about it. And honestly, when you go to sell a condo, the first question a buyer's agent's going to ask you is there any litigation? Is there any assessments being charged?
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit more about assessments, because a lot of people think, well, you know, if it assesses, I'm selling and getting out of here. Well, not so fast. Because you as a home seller owning a condo with an assessment, you're going to absorb that cost when you go to sell, not the buyer. The buyer doesn't want anything to do with that. Now, when it comes to the HOAs, you know, adding an extra HOA for that assessment, oftentimes the buyer's still going to ask you to cover the cost of the total assessment because they don't want to pay for that. Not only that, but some buyers can't afford to pay for their condo and their HOA and now the assessment. So it then becomes a matter of qualifying and getting fewer buyers in the door. And not to mention, when we talked about litigation, the number one problem that happens with litigation is you can't sell your condo when it's in litigation. So if you buy a condo and it goes into litigation and you decide you want to sell and liquidate it or get that monkey off your back kind of a thing, you're going to find that it's not going to, if a buyer...
It's not going to finance.
It's not going to finance. You'd have to find a cash buyer, and those are few and far between. So again, you get stuck in this, you know, this vicious cycle of, oh, I bought a condo, now they have assessments, now I want to sell it, and you can't, or you take a severe hit on the price. There was one more story. There was a complex that actually had this happen years ago where everybody got hit with an assessment, went into litigation, sellers all tried to liquidate, a bunch of them did, and they ended up having to sell for substantially less, like almost giveaway pricing. And guess who ended up buying those units? Cash buyers, because those were a smoke and deal, and they knew eventually it would turn around a little bit. So yeah,
it's almost like buying into the timeshare horrors, you know. I mean, unfortunately, there's so many things to think about. And the other thing to consider, you know, with these HOAs, because there's going to be a vast range. I'm sure you realize you're like, well, what's a normal range? I'm not really sure that there is a normal range, you know. Like we see a lot of condos in the 300s. You start to get a little worried if they're lower than that.
Yeah.
But then these HOAs, as you know, it's going to depend on what amenities you have, which is really important to check out. Are they offering sewer and garbage and water? And some will offer internet, some will offer some heating bills. They vary so much. If you have a secure building, again, it's going to vary. I mean, they can go up into the thousands of dollars.
Easily.
And so, you know, you have to really understand, what are you getting for your HOA dollar? What's the health of the HOA, and where is it projected? Do they have any plans to do big projects coming up, and can they afford those? I mean, there's a lot to look at when you're going through your HOA documents, and this is not the time to be like, it'll be fine. I mean, you definitely want to read through, understand every aspect of that HOA, read through the meeting minutes. Does it sound like there's a problem? Is there a reoccurring theme or that tenants are bringing up? This is the time to really do your due diligence, because it is up to you to decide if you can take that on. As you know, we are not necessarily big fans of condos at all. I think if you can always, you know, get less in a home or even a townhome, far better option.
Yeah. All right, so the other thing that we're finding to be another problem with condos is insurance. And when I talk about insurance, let me clarify. It's the HOA getting insurance on the building. So there's two insurances that we want to clarify. One is when you go to buy a condo, you're going to be getting insurance for the sheetrock in. So anything that happens inside your unit, your insurance covers you. The exterior stuff, all the stuff that the
all
HOA
the common
covers,
areas, all the exterior maintenance, roofs,
liability,
systems.
all that stuff, the HOA is required to have it. And that is the insurance that is becoming extremely problematic. And let me explain how problematic this is getting for people. You've probably maybe heard in other states like Florida, California, states where they have a lot of weather-related issues, right? These insurance companies are finally saying, whoa, like when Hurricane Ian came through, I mean, I think there was like $1 trillion in like damages to buildings. And these insurance companies, yes, they too have insurance as well, but not enough a lot of times for those catastrophic events to happen. And because they're seeing them happen a lot, they're just finally realizing that they can't afford to insure. So what they're doing is either saying they're not going to insure, or they're going to charge through the roof. You saw over the news a lot of big insurance companies leaving those states saying, we're out, we're not even going to bother. Well, guess who's left? They charge a lot. Now, in Portland, Oregon, where we're from, we don't see a lot of natural disasters, but is this happening in Portland? Yes. Yeah. We're starting to see it happen in Portland, where the cost of homeowners insurance is going up and up. And yes, a lot of it has to do with the age of the units. We know of a complex that recently, up until a week before their renewal date of their insurance, could not find any insurance company to renew this place. When they finally found one, literally in the nick of time, their insurance went from $80,000 a year to $350,000 a year.
And this is a nice building. It's not like
well managed, well maintained. It's one of those where the homeowner was very worried that in a year from now, when that renewal comes back, that insurance company might say, we're not even going to renew. And then they're subject to higher premiums. And so they got out, they sold, seeing the writing on the wall.
But here's something to think about. So you're like, oh, okay, so it went from $80,000 to $300,000. That's $220,000 for a year that now has to be absorbed by all of those homeowners. I mean, HOAs don't have money that doesn't, it's just like taxes.
Yep.
So, HOAs don't make money. They take money from their tenants. That's how they get the money to do all of these things. So in essence, you can just imagine what those HOA dues, how much they went up.
Yeah. And that is, we're starting to see this happen more and more. And it's just the beginning, you guys. We think condos are really going to face an issue in the next few years where it might be next to impossible to sell a condo that you might have purchased just because of your insurance costs going up. I mean, you have to understand that the cost of your just buying the condo is one thing, but the buyers have to qualify on the HOA. And that HOA is going to include the HOA insurance. So when those condo dues go from $350 a month to $850 a month, and you say, whoa, what's going on? It's because they pass on the cost of that insurance to the homeowners. And then when the homeowners go to sell, it could be unsellable. That jump in amount could keep a whole lot of buyers away. And there's literally a problem in Florida right now where they can't even get insurance. It's like, and you, guess what? You don't get insurance, you don't get financing. That means all the buyers that have to buy your house have to be cash. And those cash buyers, they're not paying fair market value. They're saying, I need a smoking deal.
Because obviously there's a risk with purchasing a property that can't get an insurance.
Yeah. So our recommendation is that started in the last year, and we started to see it trickle in, and then recently started to hear stories, and we're talking to our other colleagues who are also selling condos, and we're saying, you know what? We cannot at this time feel good about selling a condo to somebody without them explicitly knowing the high risk involved, and making sure that if you go to buy a condo, you are absolutely doing your due diligence through the nose and making sure you understand that there's just inherent risk with it. Even if everything checks out while you're looking at all the HOA documents, who's to say in a year or two from now that things could drastically change?
Yeah.
We have a client that bought a condo years ago. I mean, we're talking like 10 years ago. And he has tried twice to get it on the market to sell it and has not been able to do so because it's been in chronic litigation. HOA dues have gone up, and it's just a difficult situation. And that's just an example of one person. There are many others out there, and so we're just making it we want to make it known that these are things you absolutely need to be aware of if you're thinking about buying.
A very high risk investment right now. High risk.
Yeah, we can't recommend. Okay, the other one that has always been around that we always have warned people about with condos is rules and restrictions. You are part of a collective, so you don't get the final say on how things go. If you don't like it, then you can be a part of the board, you can have a say, but usually there's just things that you may have to take into account. Pets are not always allowed in all condo buildings. Or all types of pets.
Exactly. So you may be limited to how many pets you can have. again, you have to think with the mentality that this is a shared living space in some aspects. And so, even construction or remodeling on your unit can come with rules and regulations that you have to follow, because you have to take into account you're probably living above and below somebody. And, so it's very much a different type of living. Sometimes there's security things or, people coming and going from your building even.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of aspects that you have to think about. But the rules and the regulations are going to vary for each HOA. I think this is the hardest part with HOAs, especially in Oregon, where they're kind of like the wild, wild west, it feels like, is that every HOA is different. What they cover is different, how they're operated and managed is different, and then what their rules and regulations allow for are going to be different.
And some are self-managed, meaning the people in the complex are self-organized to save money. A lot of them do that to save money. But you have to be very, very, very involved, and you have to have people that know how to manage the financial aspect of it. And there's been horror stories with that, as you can imagine. And having a professional property management company is really worth the extra money because they follow the laws and the rules, and they also help govern the laws and the rules. So if you're somebody that's living in a complex and you're having a problem with a neighbor who's not following all the bylaws and so forth, then they kind of jump in and help assist with that. So it's one of those where, you are part of a larger group. And so while you might get the ease of living and not having to worry about the outside,
you're also not going to get the freedom to do whatever you want with your unit.
That's right.
You may not be able to rent it. You may not be able to have the pets you want. You may not be able to do the renovations or, other things that you want to do. So just keep that in mind. Read through those rules with a fine-tooth comb.
So the moral of the story is that the last thing we want to say is it could potentially be very difficult to resale your condo, and it's all about timing. We see some people that are on the market in condos and they have to sell. They're getting a job relocation or whatnot. And unfortunately, their condo complex at that time might be going through some issues with their HOA or litigation or assessments. And unfortunately, you have to play by those rules, and the buyers out there and how they're financed are all going to play into that and the market. If we're in a buyer's market for condos.
Well, I think too, even the perception, I think, you can look over through the history of the real estate market, and, there was a time when like this tiny home and really condensed living and minimalism kind of took hold, and everybody was like, I don't need any space. I can live in an economy apartment or, condo. And I think certain things in history, COVID, have made us realize that having a little bit of space is really kind of a nice thing. Being able to get outside, having outdoor areas. And I've seen it dramatically that like since COVID and since everybody has moved out of the cities, we haven't seen them go back to the condos. Yeah. The condo markets they're
suffering.
Absolutely crying right now because there's, when you go to sell, if you have to, you may have 10 other units in your building.
Yeah. Good point.
There's a lot of options when it comes to these condos.
Let me share something that you just talked about that triggered me, because what ends up happening when there's like 10 to 12 to 14 units for sale all in one building, all those sellers want and need to sell, and they start lowering their prices, and they lower them until they find the buyer. So even though you might have a unit that doesn't need to sell, you watch your neighbors who need to sell come down and come down and come down. And a lot of people find themselves underwater on those units or losing substantial value and investment because unfortunately you are beholden to what everyone else in the complex is doing. And we're seeing that happen firsthand in the Portland metro area, especially in downtown. We have gone through a lot with downtown. Now there are, it's another video, right? We're talking about how downtown is coming back to life a bit. But it is taking some time, and we've lost a lot of retailers, a lot of businesses. And so it used to be this vibrant place that you could own a condo and run around downtown and have dinner and go shopping and do all these things. And, there was places all over. And now it's very limited to certain locations where you still have some restaurants and things like that. So unfortunately, I think it's going to take many, many years for the condo market, especially here in Portland. And honestly, with the insurance that we talked about all over the country, we're starting to see this happen. And I think the big states that are really suffering from it are examples of what could happen to other, states as they kind of look at what, the demise of the insurance world. So this is our warning to you, if you will, to really steer clear. There are other great options. Like what Eric had mentioned, townhomes, still relatively very safe and not as big of an issue with all these things because you tend to own the land. Yep. And there's, it's just a little bit of a less risk. But at the same time, we just want people to be aware that while condos, I know they serve a purpose and we have sold them over the years, it's just something to be really extremely cautious on.
And something to, before we go here, something to keep in mind is they're starting to change the style of condos a little bit. So we're starting to see a lot of like either standalone condos, which is a weird situation, or townhome style condos. And just keep in mind that you still don't own land with that. It's all structure. And so that HOA is probably going to be mindful of that. And just, again, we hate saying it, but like your HOA shouldn't be cheap when you're in a condo.
Yeah, I know.
If it is, you're in for a world of hurt down the road.
Yeah.
So be mindful of what you're looking at. Make sure that when you are moving forward with something, if it's not a traditional style, that you're looking at exactly what the legal description of it is, and making sure that it's, if you're looking for a townhouse, that it's actually a townhouse and not a condo that's made to look like a townhouse.
Well, thanks for listening to this whole not maybe positive video, but we just want you to be aware of how we feel about it, being in the business a long time and watching people buy and sell these condo units. I think it's really important to advise and give some feedback to what we see.
Watching the market change.
Yeah.
This is really also an evolution of the market changing and, in terms of the insurance and some of the other things that we're facing. So at this time, it's not the best investment, but we've got ideas on what are good investments.
Yeah, so don't let that turn you off to buying altogether. Reach out to us. All of our information's below, and we're happy to go over with you options that we help people maybe look at differently if they are starting off their search with condos in mind. And of course, you can always buy a condo. We're not here to say don't do it, but we're saying don't do it, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Like,
buyer beware.
Heed the warning. So anyway, reach out to us. We'd be happy to help.